The ABC premiered TV's first animated primetime series, The Flintstones. In honor of the anniversary, some Flintstones trivia. It was loosely based on The Honeymooners and originally aimed at adults.
The Flintstones was never meant for children. In 1960, Fred and Barney stood in front of cameras and sold cigarettes to American families. They smoked on screen. They sang jingles for Winston. And here's what nobody talks about. Every single original voice actor died from smoking-related diseases. All of them. The voice of Fred, the voice of Barney, the voice of Wilma, the voice of Betty. Gone the same way. How did a cigarette commercial become the most beloved cartoon in history? And why did the studio try so hard to make everyone forget? William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were already famous long before anyone heard of Fred Flintstone. At MGM, they had created Tom and Jerry, and those theatrical shorts won them 7 Academy Awards. Then everything changed in 1957 when MGM shut down its animation department. Suddenly, the future they knew disappeared. So they turned to television and built new shows like The Huckleberry Hound Show. The work paid the bills, but something felt missing. Their cartoons were now seen as children's entertainment, and they wanted to prove they could make something for adults in prime time. The search for that idea turned into a messy stretch of trial and error. The team threw around all kinds of settings and characters, trying anything that might work. They talked about ancient Romans and hillbillies. Someone suggested pilgrims. Native Americans came up too. Nothing felt right, and the project drifted until storyboard artist Dan Gordon made a simple suggestion. He said the show should take place in prehistoric times, and right there, he sketched 2 characters wearing animal skins. One of them had a bird playing a record with its beak. That strange little drawing gave the whole project a direction. Character designer Ed Benedict refined those rough sketches and shaped the look of the family. Joseph Barbera wanted them to look neat and respectable, even though they lived in a Stone Age world. So Wilma ended up wearing a stone necklace that looked like oversized pearls. The show slowly came together, but even the name caused trouble. At first it was called the Flintstones, and everyone liked how it sounded. Then Mort Walker, the cartoonist behind Hi and Lois, noticed the similarity to his comic strip family, called the Flintstones. His lawyers stepped in and forced a change. The show briefly became the Gladstones after a Los Angeles telephone exchange, and only after that did the final name settle into place. Bill Hanna later admitted that losing the original name hurt him because he always thought the Flintstones sounded better. Even after the concept was ready, selling the show almost ended the whole effort. Early in 1960, Joseph Barbera carried a 90-second pilot film and a few storyboards to New York and spent 8 exhausting weeks pitching the idea. Every day meant another meeting with network executives or advertising agencies. Most of them showed little interest, and by the end, Barbera was worn out and close to giving up. On the very last day, he walked into ABC and delivered one more presentation, and that was the one that worked. The network agreed to order 28 episodes for the first season, and just like that, the show survived. Anyone who watched it closely could see where the characters came from. Fred Flintstone felt almost identical to Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners. Barney Rubble echoed Ed Norton. Wilma and Betty reflected Alice and Trixie. The same working-class husband dreamed up schemes while his loyal neighbor went along with them, and the same patient wives dealt with the chaos. Hanna admitted the influence without hesitation because The Honeymooners was the most popular show on television at the time, and its characters left a strong impression on him. Barbera tried to be more careful about the comparison, but he even hired a writer from The Honeymooners. The result disappointed him, since the script had plenty of dialogue but almost no visual humor. and he later said it felt lifeless. Jackie Gleason noticed the resemblance right away. His lawyers told him he could probably force the show off the air if he wanted. The legal case looked strong, yet the decision was not so simple. Friends warned him that people might remember him as the man who took away a show loved by children. In the end, he let it go. Years later, he confirmed that they considered suing but chose not to go through with it. He never received credit or payment, and no lawsuit was ever filed. One of the strangest parts of the show's early years involved cigarettes. Winston Cigarettes sponsored the series during its first 2 seasons from 1960 to 1962, and the advertising was woven right into the program. These were not quick breaks or background ads. Fred and Barney appeared in fully animated segments where they smoked Winstons and repeated the slogan that Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. In one commercial, the two of them slipped behind the house to smoke while Wilma and Betty worked inside, only to be chased off when their wives caught them. In another, Fred visited a Stone Age tobacconist named Rocky to buy a pack. Episodes often ended with Fred lighting a cigarette for Wilma while singing the Winston jingle. And the first season even placed the Winston advertisement inside the opening credits. Later broadcasts quietly removed that detail. Time turned those cheerful ads into something darker. Every one of the original voice actors suffered from smoking-related illnesses. Alan Reed, the voice of Fred, died of heart disease and emphysema in 1977. Bay Benaderet, who voiced Betty, died of lung cancer in 1968 at 62. Jean Vander Pyle, Wilma's voice, died of lung cancer in 1999 at 79. Mel Blanc, who voiced Barney, died of heart disease and emphysema in 1989. Even Henry Corden, who later replaced Reed as Fred, died of emphysema in 2005. Vander Pyle's son later said that everyone on the show smoked, and many of them struggled with coughing when they laughed, which led to the quiet, closed-mouth giggles that became part of Wilma and Betty's voices. Winston ended its sponsorship in 1963 after the birth of Pebbles shifted the audience toward younger viewers, and Welch's grape juice replaced the cigarette company. A few years later, the irony became impossible to ignore when the Flintstones appeared in a public service announcement for the American Cancer Society in 1968, only 2 years after the original run of the show had ended. Adult sponsors kept finding their way into the series. In 1967, Hanna-Barbera produced a strange 19-minute promotional film for Busch Beer that was meant only for wholesalers. In the story, Fred and Barney quit their jobs and spend their time drinking Busch beer in a bar while watching Busch commercials on a Stone Age television network. At one point, a floating female hand appears from a glittering cloud above the drinkers and whispers for them to calm down. The film never reached the public and remains one of the oddest pieces connected to the show. While the series continued to grow, one of its main voices nearly disappeared. On January 24, 1961, Mel Blanc was driving his Aston Martin along Sunset Boulevard when another car struck him head-on at a dangerous intersection known as Dead Man's Curve. The crash left him with a triple skull fracture, broken ribs, fractures in both legs, a shattered pelvis, and 6 fractured vertebrae. He slipped into a coma that lasted about 2 weeks. The story of how he woke up became famous in Hollywood. Doctors at UCLA Medical Center tried everything without success, until one neurologist tried a different idea and spoke to him through his characters. He asked how Bugs Bunny was feeling that day, and after a pause, Blanc answered in a weak voice saying he was fine and asking how the doctor was doing. When asked about Tweety, he answered in the familiar voice that he thought he saw a putty tat. His son Noel later confirmed the story. Jean Vander Pyle became the voice of Wilma Flintstone at a time when television was still young, and she stayed with the character longer than anyone expected. She voiced Wilma for all 166 episodes, and kept coming back for every special, spin-off, and movie, well into the 1990s. She even voiced Pebbles later on. In fact, she was the only performer who lasted from the original 1959 pilot all the way to the final versions of the show decades later, which meant Wilma's voice never really changed, even as everything else did. Her audition was almost casual. Joseph Barbera brought her into a room with B. Benaderet and asked them to read lines together. After a few minutes, he asked which roles they wanted. Jean answered right away that she wanted to be Wilma, and B simply said that was fine with her. The decision was made just like that, quick and easy, and it would shape the sound of the show for years. The pay did not match the importance of the role. Jean earned only $250 per episode, and when the show ended in 1966, she agreed to what she later called the worst decision of her life. Instead of keeping the rights to future payments, she accepted a one-time payment of $15,000. At the time, it probably felt like security, but the show did not fade away. It went into syndication and stayed there for decades, running in more than 80 countries and reaching hundreds of millions of viewers. Every time the episodes aired, the money went somewhere else. Around her, other voices were coming and going. B. Benaderet left the show under circumstances that were never fully clear. The public story said she was busy with Petticoat Junction, but people who worked inside the studio remembered it differently. They said she simply stopped being called for recording sessions, and when she finally asked why, she was told that another actress had taken her place. Mel Blanc, who voiced Barney Rubble, was deeply upset by the change because he and B had worked side by side for more than 20 years. He later wrote that they had spent so much time together in studios that he joked she was the other woman in his life. Even before the show officially began, there had already been quiet disappointments. June Foray, one of the most respected voice actresses in the business, played Betty Rubble in the original 1959 demonstration film. Then, without warning, she was replaced before the series went into production. The decision hurt her deeply, and for years afterward, she refused to work with Hanna-Barbera again. She said she was terribly disappointed and never even got the chance to come back and audition again. Not long after the series found its rhythm, another decision reshaped the entire show, and it started with a toy company. When the writers first planned for Fred and Wilma to have a child, they imagined a son named Fred Jr. Early merchandise was already using that name. Then an executive from Ideal Toy Company pointed out that a girl doll would sell much better than a boy doll. When Joseph Barbera heard that, the idea changed almost instantly, and the baby became a daughter. Her name would be Pebbles. What followed was one of the biggest marketing pushes television had ever seen. Executives from advertising agencies and networks flew to Hollywood to coordinate the launch. A national contest invited viewers to guess Pebbles' birth weight, and more than 600,000 entries poured in. The winner was a butcher from Florida, who received a trip around the world along with spending money. Newspaper ads for Pebbles dolls appeared on the same day as the birth episode, with a simple plan laid out in order. See the ad that day. Watch the show that night. Buy the doll tomorrow. The plan worked almost perfectly. Within 2 months, Ideal Toy Company sold 3 million Pebbles dolls and earned around $20 million in early 60s money. The birth episode itself drew ratings close to the famous I Love Lucy birth episode from a decade earlier. In a strange twist of timing, John Vanderpill was pregnant in real life and gave birth to her own son on the very same day the episode aired. The success of Pebbles changed the show in ways that went far beyond merchandise. Winston cigarettes dropped their sponsorship, and Welch's grape juice took over. The audience began to grow younger, and the tone slowly shifted. The series had started as a primetime comedy aimed at adults with jokes about married life and everyday frustrations, but it began moving toward a family and children's show. In later seasons, the Rubbles adopted the mysterious super-strong baby, Bam Bam, whose origins were never explained, and eventually a small green alien named the Great Gazoo appeared. By then, the transformation was complete, and the show felt very different from where it had started. Yet underneath the Stone Age jokes, there were still stories that dealt with serious adult problems, especially when it came to Fred Flintstone. His gambling habit appeared again and again, sometimes in ways that felt surprisingly realistic. In one early episode, his childhood nickname is revealed as Betting Freddy, and the simple word bet makes him lose control as he stammers and repeats it over and over. Wilma explains that he had once gambled away everything they owned and had even been forced to see a psychiatrist because of it. The problem kept returning. In one story, Fred risks his entire weekly paycheck on dinosaur races. In another, he loses the vacation money in slot machines and then suggests selling the family car just so they can afford food. One gambling counselor later studied the character and concluded that Fred showed multiple signs of a real gambling disorder, including failed attempts to stop and constant chasing of losses. It was a surprisingly serious thread running through a cartoon from the early 60s. The marriage between Fred and Wilma could be just as intense. The show borrowed its style from The Honeymooners, and the tension between husband and wife often felt genuine. In the very first episode, Fred pretends to have a head injury so he can skip a date with Wilma and go bowling instead. Many of the physical gags came from Wilma herself, as she dropped bowling balls on Fred's feet or smacked him when he pushed too far. Even in that first episode, Fred shouts in panic not to be hit in the head just before the sound of a crash fills the room. Years later, the darkest version of their story appeared in a special that almost disappeared completely. The Flintstones on the Rocks aired once on Cartoon Network in November 2001 and was never shown again or released on home video. The story shows Fred and Wilma on the edge of separation as they visit a family therapist and struggle to repair their marriage. There are hints of infidelity and uncomfortable moments where both couples overhear each other through the shared wall of their homes. Fred makes careless remarks that sound openly prejudiced, and the mood stays heavy from beginning to end. There was no laugh track to soften the tension, and even though the special carried a general audience rating, its themes felt far more adult than anyone expected. After that single broadcast, it quietly vanished, surviving only through unofficial recordings passed from one viewer to another. A strange final chapter for a show that had once begun with a simple audition and a voice that stayed the same for more than 40 years. The Flintstones began as a simple show about a Stone Age family living a modern life. But near the end, it started to feel like the show was drifting somewhere strange. In the 6th and final season, a tiny green alien floated into bedrock, and everything changed. His name was the Great Gazoo, a small glowing creature who hovered in the air and spoke in a calm, sarcastic voice while calling everyone dum-dums. He had been banished from his home planet Zetox after inventing a dangerous device, and now he was stuck on Earth with Fred and Barney as the only adults who could see him, along with children and animals who somehow noticed him too. Gazoo first appeared on October 29, 1965, and many fans later pointed to that moment as the point when the show lost its balance. Early scripts had called him Professor Og in a story named The Wizard of Og, and other names were tested before the strange alien finally settled on the name Gazoo. The creators tried to give him meaning, even describing him as a kind of reflection of life and its strange turns. But most viewers did not see anything that deep. To them, he looked like an obvious attempt to copy the fantasy sitcoms that were popular at the time, shows filled with magic and supernatural characters that had nothing to do with bedrock. The Flintstones had always been about a prehistoric version of everyday life, and Gazoo pulled it somewhere else. He only appeared in 11 episodes before the series ended, and his story about trying to return home was never finished. After that, he seemed to disappear completely, almost erased from the Flintstones world for more than 3 decades, until he finally returned in a prequel film in 2000. Even The Simpsons later joked about him by creating a tiny floating alien named Osmodiar who only Homer could see, which felt like a quiet reminder of how strange Gazoo had always been. Over the years, the show picked up other problems too, including episodes that quietly disappeared from television. One episode called The Prowler was banned completely in 2024 because of an offensive Asian stereotype. Another episode titled Latin Lover was removed from syndication because of scenes involving spousal abuse. Droop Along Flintstone was banned in Canada for its portrayal of Native Americans. Even the old cigarette commercials featuring Fred and Barney smoking Winston cigarettes vanished from syndicated broadcasts, leaving many viewers unaware they had ever existed. While the show faded from television in its original form, the characters quietly took on a second life through something much smaller. In 1968, Flintstones chewable vitamins appeared in stores, produced by Miles Laboratories and later owned by Bayer. The vitamins became a huge success and eventually turned into the #1 children's vitamin brand in the United States, bringing in more than $100 million a year decades later. The cheerful jingle that played in commercials was written by Martin O'Donnell, who would later compose music for the Halo and Destiny video games, though few people ever noticed the connection. Yet one familiar face was missing from the bottle for a very long time. Fred was there, and Wilma was there. Barney and Pebbles and Bam Bam all had their own shapes. Dino appeared too, and even the Great Gazoo showed up as a vitamin. At one point, the Flintstone car was turned into a tablet as well, but Betty Rubble was nowhere to be found. The reason sounded like a joke, but it was completely real. Her thin waist kept breaking during manufacturing, and the company could not produce a reliable shape, so Betty stayed out of the lineup for more than 25 years. Fans noticed, and some of them complained in unusual ways. One rock band even named itself Betty's Not a Vitamin as a protest, and the name later ended up on a list of the best band names ever printed in a magazine. The problem finally reached a wider audience when Rosie O'Donnell played Betty in the 1994 live-action movie and began publicly asking why Betty still was not included. Bayer responded by holding a telephone poll, and the results were clear. More than 15,000 people voted to add Betty, while only a small group voted against it. In 1995, Betty finally joined the bottle, replacing the Flintstone car, and the product manager joked that they hoped no one would be too upset about losing the car. Even then, the vitamins had their share of trouble. Lawsuits later claimed that some varieties were advertised as complete, even though certain vitamins were missing, and another case accused the company of labeling products as free of artificial flavors when they actually contained them. Poison control centers also reported steady calls from worried parents whose children had eaten too many tablets because the bright shapes and sweet taste made them feel like candy. The iron-fortified versions carried strong warnings, since too much iron could be deadly for young children. Around the same time, another part of the Flintstones world was quietly becoming a lasting success. Fruity Pebbles and Cocoa Pebbles cereals were launched nationwide in October 1971 after replacing an earlier product that had failed. Early ideas for the names included Flint Chips and Rubble Stones, until a creative director suggested the simpler names that stuck. The cereals became the oldest brand ever built around a media character and continued selling more than 50 years later. Strangely enough, an episode from 1963 had already shown Barney trying to feed baby Pebbles a cereal called Pebbles years before the real cereal even existed, which made it feel as if the show had predicted its own merchandise. The Flintstones returned to the spotlight in 1994 with a live-action movie that took nearly a decade to make. Development began in 1985 and passed through the hands of 8 different writers before the script was finished. Steven Spielberg served as executive producer and strongly pushed for John Goodman to play Fred Flintstone, even though Goodman later admitted he had not been excited about the role. Danny DeVito was considered for Barney, but turned it down and suggested Rick Moranis instead. Elizabeth Taylor appeared as Wilma's mother in what became her final theatrical film, and Halle Berry played a character named Miss Sharon Stone in a joke that felt very much of its time. The movie earned more than $340 million worldwide on a modest budget, making it a major financial success. Yet critics reacted harshly. Reviews were poor. The screenplay won a Razzie Award, and famous critics Siskel and Ebert both gave it a thumbs down. Even co-creator Joseph Barbera praised the look of the film while quietly admitting that the story was not as strong as he believed it could have been. A sequel-prequel arrived in 2000 under the title Viva Rock Vegas, but this time the results were far worse. John Goodman chose not to return because he feared being trapped in the role, and the new cast struggled to carry the film. The production cost climbed to more than $80 million, while ticket sales reached barely $60 million worldwide, turning the movie into a clear failure. Among the background performers was a young Kristen Stewart in a tiny uncredited role, included because her mother worked on the production. After that, Hollywood kept trying to revive the Flintstones, but none of the attempts survived for long. Seth MacFarlane once received an order to produce a new animated series, yet abandoned the project after deciding he could not make Fred Flintstone feel different enough from Peter Griffin. Years later, another series titled Bedrock was planned, with Elizabeth Banks voicing an adult Pebbles, but that project was canceled in 2024 before it could reach television. One of the few creative successes came from an unexpected direction when DC Comics released a 12-issue series that used the Flintstones setting to explore serious ideas about war, religion, consumer culture, and the meaning of life. Critics praised it as something completely different from what anyone expected, calling it one of the most surprising achievements in modern comics. Fans, meanwhile, began building their own explanations for the strange details scattered across the series. One popular idea suggested that Bedrock was not the distant past at all, but a future world after a disaster. Supporters pointed to the characters celebrating Christmas long before the birth of Christ, using modern-looking paper money and living in a society with advanced banking systems and organized businesses. In the special where the Jetsons visited Bedrock, Elroy's time machine was set to travel into the future, but landed in the Stone Age town instead, which led some viewers to imagine Orbit City floating high above a ruined Earth, while Bedrock existed below. The show itself left many smaller mysteries behind that were never explained. Baby Puss. The saber-toothed cat appeared in the closing credits, locking Fred out of the house night after night. Yet, the cat almost never appeared inside actual episodes and seemed to be forgotten by the writers. Dino, the family pet, spoke in full sentences and even outsmarted Fred in his very first appearance, then suddenly turned into a barking dog-like creature who never spoke again for the rest of the series. At one point, Dino even had a litter of puppies with a neighbor's dinosaur, but the puppies and their mother vanished from the story without another mention. Details about Fred's life shifted constantly as well. His home address changed several times, from Rocky Way to Cave Stone Road to different versions of Cobblestone Way, before finally settling on 301 Cobblestone Way, with a postal code borrowed from a real town in Louisiana. Even Mr. Slate's first name refused to stay the same, as episodes called him Sylvester or Nate, or Oscar or George, depending on the story. The famous theme song carried its own hidden story. During the first 2 seasons, the show did not even use Meet the Flintstones at all, and instead opened with a simple instrumental called Rise and Shine. The familiar theme arrived in the 3rd season and became so popular that later broadcasts edited it into the earlier episodes, so it felt as if it had always been there. The melody drew part of its structure from a passage in a Beethoven piano sonata written in 1801, and years later, a survey in the United Kingdom found that the Flintstones theme remained the most recognized children's television theme among adults. All these pieces together make the Flintstones feel like a world that kept shifting while no one was looking. A show that started as a simple family comedy and slowly filled with strange characters, missing details, forgotten ideas, and unexpected successes that lasted long after the original series came to an end. Once you start following those threads, one detail pulls you into the next, and the quiet history behind Bedrock turns out to be almost as interesting as the show itself.